Okay. All right. This looks like it's working. So welcome to my first YouTube Live. Hopefully we'll get a few people on. In the meantime, I already had several questions sent to me in advance. So that's going to help. So first question was about Earth's magnetic field, the interruption of Earth's magnetic field. And I've also read something about the ozone layer. There's a big hole in the ozone layer, and then in a few weeks it might resorb. So as you may know, my favorite comparison to what is happening to us at the moment is our own birth. And the Earth's magnetic field, symbolically speaking, is equivalent to the womb, basically, the barrier of the womb, which protects the baby from the outside world. And the outside world being, other people, the air, plenty of different things. And so in this case, you could say that it's not like we created the Earth's magnetic field, of course. The womb exists, whether there's a baby inside or not. But we interact with the magnetic field and we influence it. So let's just say that the Earth's magnetic field in some way is a kind of a consciousness bubble which filters filters things that can come from the outside. And that is something that is well recognized by scientists. They say that quite openly, that the Earth's magnetic field sort of protects us from bombardments from the sun, galactic radiation, and all kinds of other things. What they don't understand is that radiation is can be actually different consciousnesses, different information from all over the place. So just like the womb is a kind of a barrier which filters out light, filters out the sound, protects the baby from the outside world, so too our magnetic field serves the same purpose. And of course, some may say that it's temporarily failing or temporarily being interrupted. And it's the same thing that happens during birth, where it's not like the belly is kind of opened up, but as the baby sort of descends, then it goes a little bit outside and the top of the head sort of, is in contact with the outside and then goes back in. And there's this back and forth movement until the baby is actually fully born. So it's a whole process. And so you could say that the interruption of the Earth's magnetic field is mirroring actually what happens during birth, where it sort of fails temporarily, allowing for more information and interaction from the outside, and then it resumes the way it was before. And so it's also a protective barrier which won't be broken until the baby basically can hold its own. So it's at the point where the baby sort of realizes that it is one global collective organism, then it can survive on the outside as that organism and not decompose into its subparts, like the stomach going one way and all that stuff, and just the cells kind of what we would call death, but basically that each cell would have their own kind of experience and outside of the womb. So right now, this coronavirus and all kinds of other things and events are trying to consolidate our understanding and recognition that we are one collective organism, humanity. And it translates via concepts like solidarity, loving one another, and all that stuff. But ultimately, it's just so that when we're exposed to the outside world and other consciousnesses, that we will not dissolve into them. and disperse, that we can actually hold our own kind of identity as humanity, even when bombarded from the outside. And we've been prepared for that. We've been preparing for that for a long time. For instance, interactions with Pleiadians, channelers, all of those things are meant for us to be able to interact with those consciousnesses as a humanity and not sort of dissolve into them and identify fully with them, and like to really recognize that we have our own identity and to be able to interact in that way. And many psychologists would say that it's the same for a baby, which identifies with its parents. The baby thinks that the parents are part of his body, for instance. And so it's a whole learning process of being able to say, this is me and there's somebody else there. And so the same process, we're going to undergo the same kind of process, being able to sort of hold our own consciousness as humanity in the face of being exposed to more and more outside contacts. So that's one topic. Then the other topic, so I've made this analogy before of this evolution of consciousness and humanity and reality as being an interface. And so saying, for instance, that humanity right now is like running MS-DOS, basically with a command line, so very basic understanding of reality, and that Pleiadians or evolved ET races would be like if they were running Windows 10. And while they have a sort of retro compatibility, which means they can run a CMD command line within Windows 10, even though it's, they can if they want to. For us, it's more difficult to interact with them. And there was this question about how can we basically interact in a harmonious way with this virus, maybe by upgrading our interface. And here, I would say it's not so much about that. I think that ultimately, once we figure out the rules for how to interact and behave to one another in a harmonious way, then all of biology sort of becomes harmonized, and there isn't this these chaotic interactions. And much the same you see in a living cell, where inside of it all the chemical reactions are very much harmonious and are no longer conflictual and dualistic. But that's going to be a lengthy process. But what I mean is that that's what the Bible, when the Bible says that the lion and the lamb will lay side by side, that is an allegorical way of saying that once you figure out how to make sure that all of biology can work in a harmonious way, then of course all of these things disappear. I see that 3 people are watching me. I'm done basically with a few questions that were sent in advance. But if you have any questions, by the way, how are you guys doing? I don't see anybody on the chat. Is this even working? Hello. Anyways, if you have any live questions for me, because I've done plenty of brainstorms in the past on so many different topics, just feel free to ask. Otherwise, I don't know if I'm going to end the live or... Hi, hey, hello, Virgo Balance. Nice to see you. So yeah, if you have any questions related to the coronavirus situation, or any other topic you'd like to discuss today. What's up, man? Let's see in my notes if I have anything else that we can discuss together. Hey. Hi, Yara. Wow, good to see you. Glad that you could make it. And thank you for commenting on my videos and watching and following me. That's really nice. And I really like your channelings, by the way. Really instructive as well. Really inspiring. You and Amanda and plenty of others. I mean, it's great watching you. I mean, I have no idea what I connect to, but let's say it's my higher self as well. All right. Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So yeah, I mean, I'm here speaking from Belgium. Apparently, the confinement measures are going to be prolonged, so that's going to be challenging for many of us. Yeah, maybe I'll just talk about a very quick anecdote. I had a friend of mine that shared an article saying there's nothing good out of this virus, and like trying to really say like it's bad for the environment, it's bad for everything, nothing's going to change, and people are dying, and how can you be so positive? How can you pretend that things are positive? And I was reading this article. It was in French magazine Libération, which is very left wing, very, very pessimistic, you know. And I figured that is one of the first things that needs to change, is that person that wrote that article was probably really feeling what she was writing. That is, she was really feeling depressed, pessimistic, almost nihilistic, you know, saying, wow, this is like, it's going to be even worse after the virus. I mean, surveillance capitalism is just going to control us even more, and we're going to have to work even more, and then we're going to pollute even more. So she was probably really feeling that. But what we tend to do as human beings is to project what we're feeling and trying to make others feel the same way we do, so we feel legitimate for feeling what we're feeling inside. And so that's one of the first things that this virus is meant to, I think, to shift in us, is to acknowledge what we're feeling, and to realize that we have the right to feel it in that way, to feel the way we feel without having everybody else feeling the same way. So if that person feels really depressed, thinks that things will never improve or whatever, she has totally the right to feel the way she feels. But this tendency to always try to convince people with arguments, besides with like scientific arguments and everything, saying it will be worse because of this and this and this and this, that's one of the first things that needs to change. We all need to hold our own, to say, you know, this is what I'm feeling, but you know, I'm not trying to impose that on other people. So Virgo Balance is asking, do you feel there will be an event? Well, so I've done a video on this. I think it's Brainstorm number 36 about, or 35, can't remember, about the event specifically. And you know, the problem with the event is that it's almost like you want to have one clear moment when you know that things are shifting, when you know that you're out of one world and into another world. And as you know, I've compared what is happening to us as the birth process. There are thousands and thousands of ways that a birth process can occur. It can be really fast, it can be slow. I think that if we had an event, as in what people think an event is, that is something really cataclysmic and like really that you cannot miss, then it would have meant that we were being born by cesarean, which is the most abrupt transition from one state to another. And that would have meant that humanity was basically, I mean, it's not like it's a depressing kind of image, but that we were too immature to actually realize what was happening to us, that we would have put ourselves in danger and Mother Earth in danger, which is kind of our mother in this instance. And we required an outside intervention, which was really radical, to shift from one state into another. But that's not necessarily a good thing, because a lot of consciousnesses would have not survived that kind of shock. as you know, a cesarean, I mean, you're abruptly sort of thrust into the outside. And so, symbolically speaking, like on the outside, what we would have probably experienced is ETs dropping down from the sky with their ships, or, this grand solar flash that people were talking about, which is what a baby would experience if the baby was like in the darkness of the womb and then suddenly is thrust into the outside world via cesarean. It is a kind of a flash. So it's like bombarded with new information of, wow, this is a new reality. Now I'm somewhere completely different. And the same with the solar flash, where suddenly the electricity grid completely collapses, the financial system collapses. And that's the same kind of way a baby feels when it's taken outside of the womb, because bam, you cut the umbilical cord, the lungs don't even have the time to start functioning, like you're really in a shock. And before the baby sort of accustoms to the new reality, it's really a shock to all of its cells. That's how the cells would probably perceive that happening. If it from the perspective of the cells of the baby experiencing the cesarean, that's how they probably experience it. Now, I don't think that's what we've chosen, because we have this coronavirus, and this coronavirus looks like a very gentle kind of first contraction, trying to push us out and trying us to sort of raise our consciousnesses and evacuate some limiting beliefs, call into question the way we've been functioning thus far. And not to say that it's bad, it's just that obviously once outside the womb, the baby cannot still hold on to the placenta, and like there are changes that need to happen, but we are very gently kind of pushed along that kind of change. So I think we've the collective unconscious, basically, it's almost as if we've decided to be born in a more gentle way, a natural way, which means that the event is just going to span 10, 15, 20 years on the time scale, the equivalence of time scale between the time where humanity has sort of grown inside Gaia's womb, so to speak, inside this magnetic field, which is a sort of a consciousness bubble that we formed around ourselves, just like the baby sort of expands inside the womb and then it goes outside. So it's going to take many, many years because on the same time scale, like 9 months in the womb for a baby, and then whatever, like 1, 2, or even 24 hours of birth time. If you look at how long we've spent in the womb since, well, Adam and Eve, kind of, but it's the first men, basically, from the time that the first man, conscious man, Homo sapiens, I don't know how you would call them, since that time until now, if you take that same time span and you put it into equivalence in terms of years, then it will probably take 5, 10, 15 years. But it may actually be better for humanity that way, because we're able to take many more people with us, I think. Whereas a cesarean, I think we would have lost a lot of lives. It would have been very traumatizing. So I'm pretty happy about that, actually. But yeah, so the event is going to be a lot of events, and it's happening now. Any other questions? I know there's only 2 more people following the live chat. Not bad for somebody with 200 followers. I mean, if there are no other burning questions, maybe I'll just stop here and do another live some other time. Let's see if I have anything else in my notes that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, maybe just this one thing that I wanted to say is that very often when I do my spiritual brainstorms, I feel like I'm just talking to myself. And doing this, I feel that I'm actually much more on point than when I feel like I'm talking to somebody else. Because ultimately, if you take the very radical view that we're all one, then we are all the time only talking to ourselves. And when you're in a sort of an energy or an intention of, oh, I'm helping somebody else here on the outside, sometimes you're not that much in tune with that reality that we're all one. Whereas when you're talking to yourself, basically, yourself is the one that ultimately you can help the most. And so when I'm doing this spiritual brainstorm, sometimes I say things that surprise me, and I'm saying, wow, okay, I didn't think about that. And I surprise myself. And that's where I feel I'm most relevant, actually. I'm saying the most interesting things is when I'm speaking to myself, kind of. And it's almost like I'm helping myself. I see there are more people joining. Do you have any questions for me? Because you joined kind of late. Because if not, I don't have that much to talk about anymore. No inspiration. So glad you could join, but maybe present yourself in the chat if you can. It's still working. More people joining, but nobody asking questions. Love your stuff. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thanks for following. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now, because otherwise it's kind of weird to be here. Hey, Rising Love. Hi. So, what do you guys want to talk about? Where are you from? I'm in Belgium here. Can you talk about randomness? Does it exist? Wow, that's a vast topic. Okay, randomness does exist, but it cannot experience itself. So let's just take a purely 100% random, which I would say chaotic universe. Chaotic random universe is one where there is no interference between anything, no interaction between anything, or it's so random actually that you cannot build an experience out of it. So it's the image I give is it's kind of, infinity. It's kind of like if every single point in reality contained the whole, like a pixel on your computer screen, which would flicker between all possible states infinitely fast, which means that if you'd stretch that pixel across time, a dimension you'd call time, then if you take a still image of an infinite space with those little pixels flickering between all possible colors or whatever, if you take a still image of that space, it would be equivalent to stretching one pixel across a dimension called time, because it's the same. It's the same. And you realize that in that kind of scenario, then everything exists everywhere at the same time. But yeah, I mean, it's just random. It's like a puzzle that's completely messed up. So you cannot build an experience out of that. And I think what we're playing at is there's also one point in that space where everything is perfectly orderly, where basically you go from zero to infinity, from nothingness to universal consciousness, God, whatever, instantly. And then on the other extreme, you have everything existing but no consciousness emerging because there's no experience. So infinitely fast experience, which gets you from nothingness to universal source consciousness instantly, which means basically when it's instant, it also means that whether you're looking at it from a linear perspective where it goes from nothing to God, or from God to nothing, that is, God pre-exists before nothing and creates nothing, it's the same, because instantly means it's like really compressed. And there, from those two extremes, then you can create sort of little stories that spiral out, where they're longer and longer. So and I think the exercise that we are in right now is, how long of an experience can you create which still doesn't fizzle out into randomness and gets you still back to source? And so source is kind of trying to expand out and then going back, collapsing onto itself, saying, wow, we've gone so far. I mean, this time I forgot for 7 billion years who I was. That's amazing. And then it goes, wow, this time I forgot for 10 billion years who I was. And I got back and I lived through so many more experiences. And it's just trying to see how far it can go within that kind of eternal existing randomness, and all that is possible before it just cannot find the way back. And it doesn't really matter to it, because even if it cannot find the way back, it still benefits from that experience. But I think that's what we are, and we've accomplished quite a feat, by the way, if you look at things that way, because wow, our whole materialist assumption is that we've got to this place by sheer randomness and chance, and there's no higher principle guiding it. So the mere fact that we've actually having this conversation right now is nothing short of a miracle, if you think about it. So yes, randomness exists, but it cannot be experienced. So I've been watching videos. Thank you. Orlando, can you talk about light and dark and how we can bring both with us in ascension, not create a battle with both? So the first myth buster here, and that's kind of difficult to swallow for some, is that darkness does not exist. What exists is a light, and a light of opposite phase, which means that if you are one vibration, sort of, and you meet a vibration of opposite phase, then the interactions between those two cancel each other out and create darkness. So it's almost like if you're a light and you meet a light of opposite phase, it kind of dims your light, diminishes your vibration, which you would experience as darkness. But it's just actually a disharmonious interaction between two waves, two vibrations that are not in harmony with each other. The real darkness is nothing bad. It's actually just the void. The void, that's what I would call darkness, is the void, like nothing, as in nothingness, absolute nothingness, which is not good or bad. It's from that void that everything emerges. So it's almost like the substrate, like like a set, like a movie set on top of which you can put anything. That's the void, basically. And then the light can play around in the void like a stage, and then goes back to the void, just like a sort of a movie set. It's neutral. It's just a place, and then people come up and set up the stage, and today we're filming Lord of the Rings, and it's set up, and then there's plenty of lights going on, plenty of things happening, and then the movie's over, people move out of that stage and then bring something else in. That's what I call nothingness, the void, or darkness. But actually there is no darkness. It's more, darkness is generated from the disharmonious interaction between light and light of opposite phase. So light plus, light minus, you see it everywhere. And the best metaphor to understand that is like an atom. You think of an atom, it has negative electrons spiraling around it, positive protons inside. And so you can see that the opposites are in balance within that structure, that construct. That is the form that the solution that those subparticles have found to be in balance and in harmony, and not colliding into each other, not canceling each other. And you see that it's dualism that is included inside a sort of a strategy or a form that allows for both to coexist in a harmonious way. And we're just doing the same thing over and over again at more and more complex kind of stages. And biology is a very, very advanced stage. I mean, look at the complex world we've created, but it's the same process. It's how do you create, we've manifested as, law books that are this thick for, trying to make sure that the interactions between human beings are harmonious. But it's the same process. And ultimately what's magical is that, it's in simplicity that it exists. I mean, those rules are sometimes so simple, but the process of finding them can be very complex. but it can exist in a universe with law of attraction. Can it exist? You're talking about randomness. Well, law of attraction is simply a sort of a feedback loop where you are experiencing what you're vibrating. But yeah, so basically, one way I could think about that, because ultimately everything is experience. How do you experience randomness? And of course, I think one of the points of the source is to experience all that it is. And in order for it to experience things like random pixels flicking around, it has to find a strategy to get to that point, to actually have an observer there to live that experience. And it can already do that now. For instance, a developer could very well develop a VR, virtual reality application, where you put it on and it just generates randomly flickers of pixels flickering into in all directions and colors. I mean, you can have that experience, and then you'll experience kind of a simulation of randomness, which is not really randomness, but you could experience a simulation of randomness. I just don't know how interesting that would be to anyone. But I mean, just try to imagine what it would be. And here, make a distinction between existence and experience. Careful with those two words, is very different. Something can exist. That doesn't mean it can be experienced. You have to find a way to experience things. So that's one way of experiencing it. I just don't see what the usefulness of that would be. But you can do it. I mean, you could. But the image that I tried to give is, imagine if you had no past, you had no idea of nothing, no concepts of nothing. How would you know what kind of frame of reality you should be experiencing in just the next moment of now? Well, you'd have no idea. I mean, right now as a human being, already we are subject to so many choices every single second. Like, should I jump out of that window, or should I go and get myself a coffee, or should I continue streaming? And all of those choices. And of course, because we're human, we rank these choices, we judge them. But imagine if you had no judgment, no programming, no nothing, then ultimately, if you are just consciousness, pure consciousness, then you could experience the beginning of the universe, then the end, and then the middle, and whatever. Like a movie where you just shuffle around the frames in a random order, and then, I mean, everything would disappear. There would be no sense or meaning to anything. And that's specifically why you invent these forms and these strategies to experience things, because then suddenly you could say, I don't know, something feels right or doesn't feel right, or something is more pleasant and something is less pleasant. Whereas if you want to just experience things from, pure randomness or pure potential, then everything disappears. Meaning, sense, emotions, everything is equal. Looking at a bunch of random pixels, or looking at you, for instance, or a beautiful scenery, is the same. There's no difference. So I don't know if that answered your question, Edgelord. Any other questions for me, guys? Or we can just stop here. Sorry, I have a small cough. See 7 people watching the live stream. That's pretty good. Anything else? Otherwise, we may call it a day. Thanks for attending. All right, guys. So since I don't see any more questions, I'll just end it here, and we'll reconvene at some other point. But feel free to leave some extra questions in the comments section if you're inspired, and maybe I'll pick it up at the next live, which will be, I don't know, I'll let you know. So thanks a lot for coming, and speak to you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.